It was wide open, the curtains fluttering softly in the breeze. She's gone. Panic clawed at Caroline's insides. Had Derek already taken her? Had he planned this all along? Had he been one step ahead of her from the beginning? She knew Derek was manipulative, but this was a whole new level of cruelty. Caroline's mind raced for solutions. She had to think. She couldn't afford to lose control now. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A new message. You're too late. She's already where she belongs. The words froze Caroline in place. Where she belongs. What did that mean? Where was Emily? She tried to steady her breathing, forcing herself to think clearly. There was no time to waste. She had to find her daughter. And somehow, she had to stop Derek. Her thoughts were interrupted by another noise. Louder this time. Footsteps. A door opening. Someone moving through the house. Caroline's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't alone. The realization struck her hard. Was Derek here again? Had he circled back to finish what he started? Slowly, Caroline moved toward the hallway, trying to stay out of sight, her footsteps as quiet as possible. The house felt like a maze now, every turn filled with uncertainty. She rounded the corner, her eyes searching for the source of the sound. But what she saw made her stop dead in her tracks. There, standing at the end of the hallway, was Emily. Caroline's heart leapt with a mix of relief and confusion. Her daughter was alive. But Emily was different. There was something in her eyes that Caroline didn't recognize. A coldness. A detachment. Emily. Caroline breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. The girl didn't respond right away. She simply stood there, her back to Caroline, staring out the window as if lost in thought. Emily, please. Caroline stepped forward, her hands reaching out. I need you to come with me. We have to go. But before she could say another word, Emily turned around slowly. Her face was unreadable. There was no warmth in her gaze, no trace of the girl Caroline had raised. You're too late, Emily said, her voice flat, void of emotion. Caroline's heart stopped. What? She whispered, her breath catching in her throat. What do you mean? What happened? Emily took a step closer, her expression hardening. You think you can save me? You think I'm still yours to save? She shook her head, as though pitying her mother. I'm not the same girl you used to know. I'm not the same girl you think you can control. The words hit Caroline like a physical blow. She took a step back, struggling to comprehend what Emily was saying. This wasn't her daughter. This couldn't be her daughter. Emily, please. What are you talking about? Caroline's voice cracked, desperation creeping into her words. We can't let him win. We have to fight. Together. You and me. But Emily raised a hand, silencing her mother with a single gesture. It's too late for that, Mom. I made my choice. I don't need you anymore. Caroline's chest tightened. Her mind was reeling. This was impossible. Emily, her daughter, was choosing Derek? Was he pulling the strings from behind the scenes, manipulating her? Or had something changed within Emily herself? No, Caroline whispered, shaking her head. This isn't you. You're not like him. But Emily's eyes, cold and unwavering, seemed to cut right through her. I'm exactly like him, Emily said, her voice gaining strength. We're not so different, you and I. Caroline stepped back again, her mind scrambling. She didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. The girl standing before her was not the child she had raised. Something had shifted, something that she couldn't quite put her finger on. The familiar warmth of her daughter had been replaced by an unsettling void. Tears welled up in Caroline's eyes, not from fear, but from heartbreak. No, Emily, she said quietly. You're my daughter, and I'll never give up on you. No matter what he's done to you, I'll find a way to bring you back. But Emily's lips curled into a smirk. You think you can change my mind? You think you can save me? Caroline swallowed hard, trying to force the lump in her throat away. She couldn't lose her. She wouldn't. Not like this. She reached out, but Emily stepped back, a cold distance growing between them. You can't save me, Emily repeated, her voice colder now. You never could. Caroline's hands clenched into fists. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. Derek wasn't just after her. He had already won. He had already twisted Emily into something else, something unrecognizable. But Caroline wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. There had to be a way to bring Emily back, to undo whatever Derek had done. She had to fight for her. She had to. As Emily turned away, walking towards the door, Caroline's heart surged with determination. This wasn't over. She wasn't going to let Derek take everything from her. Not without a fight. She had no idea how she was going to do it, but one thing was clear. The stakes had never been higher. And Caroline wasn't going to stop until she got her daughter back. Caroline stood motionless, the sound of Emily's footsteps fading into the distance. Her heart pounded in her chest as the realization sunk in. Her daughter was slipping further away, not just physically, but emotionally. What had happened to her? What had Derek done? The thought of Emily, once so full of life and warmth, now standing as a shadow of herself, was too much to bear. The room felt suffocating, her breath quickening as she struggled to understand the magnitude of the betrayal she was facing. She staggered back, her legs weak, almost unable to support her. Where do I go from here? The question lingered in her mind, unanswered. She had always been the protector, the one who knew how to make things right, but now she felt helpless. For the first time, Caroline wondered if it was all over. But then, through the haze of panic, something flickered inside her. A spark of defiance, a voice that refused to let go. No, she muttered to herself, shaking her head. This isn't over. It can't be. She wiped her eyes, taking a deep breath as she straightened herself. She would not let Derek win. She would not lose Emily, not like this. Her mind raced, coming up with a plan, a way to fight back. But the answers didn't come easily. Caroline knew Derek. He was dangerous, calculating, and above all, he was relentless. She rushed to the door, her thoughts scattered, her focus narrowing only on one goal, finding Emily. But as soon as her hand touched the doorknob, her phone buzzed again. The message was simple, yet the weight of it crushed her. She's gone, and so are you. The words felt like a punch in the gut. What did that mean? Was this Derek's way of gloating, of asserting his control over her? Or was there something more? Caroline's fingers trembled as she read the message again. There had to be something she was missing, some piece of the puzzle she hadn't seen. But before she could process the thought further, a loud bang echoed through the house. Caroline's heart skipped a beat as the noise shattered the silence, followed by a low, guttural voice, one she recognized all too well. Caroline, I know you're here. Her blood ran cold. Derek, he was back. Her mind went into overdrive. There was no escape, no hiding. The only way out was to face him head-on. She had to outsmart him, outplay him at his own game. But the question was, how? With every step she took down the hallway, the weight of the situation grew heavier. Her pulse thundered in her ears, and the walls seemed to close in around her. She needed to find Emily. She had to make Derek believe that she had everything under control, that she wasn't afraid. The moment she showed weakness, it would all be over. Another bang. Closer this time. The sound of footsteps reverberated through the hall, getting louder with each passing second. Caroline froze, her breath caught in her throat. Was he coming for her? Or was Emily already in his grip, trapped in the web he had so carefully spun? Caroline, the voice, now closer, was like ice running down her spine. I know you're hiding. You always were good at that. A cold, bitter laugh followed, and Caroline could almost feel the smirk that accompanied it. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but she had to stay calm. She had to think clearly. The walls felt like they were closing in, the pressure unbearable. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the noise stopped. Silence. Caroline didn't move. She waited, holding her breath, her eyes darting from one corner of the room to the next, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. And then it hit her. He was playing with her. Derek was always a step ahead, always anticipating her every move. He wasn't rushing to find her. He was making her wait, making her sweat. The longer he kept her on edge, the more control he had. Her mind flashed back to the message. She's gone, and so are you. What did he mean by that? Was Emily really gone? Or was this just another mind game? Caroline's fingers clenched into fists. No. She refused to believe it. She couldn't. Emily was still out there. She had to be. But she had to act fast. Derek wouldn't give her much time. With a quick glance toward the front door, Caroline made her decision. She had to get to the one place Derek wouldn't expect her to go. She had to find the hidden files, the ones that could expose everything. Derek had spent years covering his tracks, but Caroline knew better. He had underestimated her. She dashed toward the staircase, her heart pounding in her chest. Every step felt like an eternity, but she pushed through, the weight of her mission propelling her forward. She couldn't let Derek have the upper hand. Not now. Not ever. At the top of the stairs, she hesitated for a moment, her breath ragged. The house seemed eerily still, but Caroline knew better than to trust the silence. She needed to stay alert, to stay ahead of him. Her hand grasped the handle of the door to the office, but just as she was about to push it open, a sound stopped her cold. A voice, soft and barely audible, but unmistakable. "Mom!" Caroline's heart skipped a beat. It was Emily's voice, but it wasn't the voice of the daughter she had known. It was distant, hollow, as though it were coming from a faraway place. "Emily," Caroline whispered, her voice breaking as she stepped forward, her hand trembling. The door creaked open, and there she was, Emily, standing in the center of the room, her back to her mother. The same coldness that had haunted her earlier was there again. Caroline's stomach twisted with dread. "Emily, what are you doing?" Caroline's voice was almost a plea, the desperation seeping through her words. "Please come back. Whatever he's done to you, we can fix it. We can fix everything." But Emily didn't move. She didn't even flinch. "You can't fix this," she said, her voice cold and empty. "I've already made my choice." Caroline's blood ran cold. The words, the way Emily said them, it was as if she had already crossed some line. It was too late. Caroline's worst fear was coming true. Emily wasn't just lost, she was gone. "No," Caroline whispered, stepping forward again, her voice trembling. "No, you haven't. You're still my daughter. You're still the girl I raised. Please, Emily, please don't let him do this to you." For the first time, Emily turned her head slowly, her eyes empty, devoid of any emotion. "It's too late," she whispered. "I'm already gone." And just like that, the door slammed shut. Caroline stood there, her body shaking, her heart breaking, as the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Derek had won. Caroline's hands trembled as the door slammed shut, leaving her standing in the hallway, stunned and breathless. The echo of Emily's voice, the finality in those words, rattled her to her core. "I'm already gone." The weight of that sentence pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. For a moment, everything went still, her surroundings blurred, the room spinning in her mind. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but instead, a hollow silence swallowed her whole. She was alone. Her daughter, her flesh and blood, had just slipped away, and she didn't know how to bring her back. The finality of Emily's choice was too much to bear. But then, just as quickly as the despair had descended, a single thought cut through the fog of helplessness. "I can't stop here." She had come too far to let Derek win. Emily hadn't truly gone. Not yet. There was still a chance to save her, to undo the damage that had been done. The door, still closed before her, felt like a barrier. But Caroline knew it wasn't just a physical door. There was a deeper wall between her and Emily now, one that would be far harder to break down. Derek had poisoned her mind, twisted her perceptions, but Caroline wasn't ready to accept that defeat. She couldn't. Taking a deep breath, Caroline reached for the handle again. The weight of the moment was crushing, but she had to keep moving. She had to find a way to reach her daughter before it was too late. When she pushed the door open, her eyes scanned the room quickly. Emily stood in the middle, her back still turned, her silhouette bathed in the faint light from the window. Caroline's voice faltered as she stepped forward. "Emily, please talk to me." For a moment, nothing happened. The stillness was suffocating, and Caroline's heart raced in her chest. But then Emily spoke, her voice low and detached. "You don't understand," Emily murmured, her voice sounding as distant as the cold wind outside. "You never have." The words stung, sharp as a knife. Caroline had always been the one who knew what was best for Emily. She had always been the one to protect her. But now, standing in this room, everything felt like a betrayal. Her daughter, Her own flesh and blood was slipping through her fingers, and Caroline had no idea how to hold on. "Please, Emily," Caroline whispered, the desperation thick in her voice. "I know I may not understand everything, but I love you. I will always love you. Don't let him change you. Don't let him win." Emily's shoulders stiffened, and for the first time, she turned slightly toward her mother. The look in her eyes was like a wall of ice, impenetrable and cold. "You don't get it," she said again, her words sharp as glass. "This isn't about him. This is about me. My choice. My life. It's my mom." Caroline recoiled, her heart aching at the distance between them. Her choice? What had happened to her little girl? What had Derek done to twist her perception so deeply? "You don't need to make this choice alone, Emily," Caroline said softly, stepping closer. "Please come back to me. We'll figure it out together. We've always figured it out before." But Emily shook her head, the hardness in her eyes growing. "You think you can fix everything with a hug and a promise? You've never let me make my own choices. You've always been in control. Always." Her voice cracked at the end, the pain seeping through the cracks of her cold exterior. Caroline froze, the words hitting her like a wave. Was she really the one who had pushed Emily away all this time? Had she been so focused on protecting her that she hadn't seen what was happening? She wanted to speak, to apologize, to make it right, but nothing came out. Instead, a voice, cold, calculated, and unmistakable, cut through the tension in the room. "I told you, Caroline. She's mine now." Derek's voice was low, a smirk evident in his tone. Caroline's heart dropped into her stomach as she turned toward the door, seeing Derek standing there, his presence filling the doorway like a dark cloud. His face was cold, unreadable, but the malicious satisfaction in his eyes was clear. You didn't," Caroline whispered, her voice trembling. "You've done this to her. You've turned her against me." Derek's eyes flicked to Emily, who stood still, her expression unreadable. "I didn't do anything, Caroline. This was always her choice. I just gave her the space to realize it." Caroline felt her legs weaken beneath her, the shock of Derek's words sinking in like a slow poison. This wasn't just manipulation. This wasn't just mind games. Derek had changed everything. He had made Emily believe that she was better off without her. And now, there was nothing Caroline could say or do to undo it. She had failed her daughter. "No," Caroline said through gritted teeth. "I won't lose her. Not to you." But Derek stepped forward, his voice icy, unyielding. "You already have." Caroline's mind raced. She had to act fast. Derek was playing his game, and she couldn't let him win. If Emily was truly lost, if her daughter had really chosen Derek, then all hope was gone. But Caroline couldn't believe that. She wouldn't. "Emily," Caroline said softly, her voice breaking as she reached out once more. "Please, I'll do whatever it takes. Just come back. You don't have to go with him. You don't have to follow him down this path." But Emily didn't move. She didn't even blink. "I already have, Mom. I already have." Caroline's heart shattered into pieces, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't give up. She had spent her entire life protecting her family, keeping them safe from harm. But now, in this moment, it felt like everything was slipping away. Just then, something shifted. A faint sound, a whisper, barely audible, came from the back of the room. Caroline's breath caught in her throat. Was it Emily? Was it her daughter's voice? Or was it something else? "Don't believe him," the voice said, almost too soft to hear. Caroline turned sharply, scanning the room for the source. It wasn't Emily. It wasn't Derek. It was something or someone else entirely. For a split second, Caroline's heart skipped a beat. Who was that? And before she could react, a new sound, a loud crash, came from the other side of the house. Caroline's heart dropped into her stomach. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The conflict was far from finished. Caroline's body stiffened as the sound of the crash reverberated through the house. The floor seemed to tremble beneath her feet, and for a moment, she thought her heart might stop altogether. What was that? She tried to steady her breath, but her mind was racing too fast, her thoughts spinning out of control. Her first instinct was to rush toward the noise, to find Emily and make sure she was safe. But her feet were glued to the floor, paralyzed by the weight of what was happening around her. Derek's figure, still standing in the doorway, didn't move. His eyes were cold, unreadable. It was as though the sound hadn't even fazed him. Instead, he let the silence linger, as if savoring the tension that hung thick in the air. "What was that?" Caroline managed to choke out, her voice barely a whisper. Her pulse was pounding in her ears. She didn't know if she wanted an answer, or if she just needed to hear his response to reassure herself that she was still in control. But there was no reassurance to be found in Derek's eyes. Only the promise of more. "It's nothing," Derek said, his voice as flat as ever. But the hint of something darker lurked beneath the surface. It was clear he wasn't going to let this moment slip by without making it worse. "But you might want to check on your precious daughter." Caroline's heart sank, her stomach churning with fear. There was something in his words, something that twisted inside her and told her everything wasn't as it seemed. She didn't trust him, didn't trust that he had no part in whatever had just happened. Without another thought, she rushed past him, her legs trembling as she moved toward the sound, her feet moving faster than her mind could keep up with. She had to reach Emily. She couldn't let anything else happen to her. The hallway seemed endless, each step echoing louder than the last. The closer Caroline got, the more the air thickened, heavy with an unshakable dread. And then, she reached the door to Emily's room. It was ajar, just enough to see the shadows moving inside. "Emily," Caroline called softly, her voice hoarse, her throat tight with fear. She pushed the door open slowly, her heart racing as she stepped inside. The room was a mess, clothes scattered on the floor, books thrown about. But that wasn't what caught Caroline's attention. It was Emily, standing in the center of the room, staring at something in her hands. Her expression was unreadable, empty, distant. Caroline's breath caught in her throat. "Emily, what's going on? Talk to me." Emily didn't respond at first. She didn't even look up. The tension in the air was thick, so thick it felt suffocating. Caroline took a step forward, trying to close the distance, but Emily's voice stopped her in her tracks. "I don't want to talk to you, Mom," Emily said, her voice flat, emotionless. "I don't want to hear it anymore." The words cut through Caroline like a blade. She hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for the coldness in her daughter's voice. It was like a stranger was standing there in her place, someone she didn't recognize. This wasn't Emily. This wasn't her daughter. "Emily, please," Caroline said, her voice shaking now. "I know you're angry, but this isn't the way. You don't have to push me away. Whatever he's told you, whatever he's made you believe, it's not true." Emily finally looked up, her eyes hollow, as if she'd been drained of everything that had once made her who she was. And in that moment, Caroline saw something she hadn't seen before. It wasn't just anger. It was fear, a deep, paralyzing fear. "Do you really think you can fix this? After everything?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't change what's been done. You can't undo all the lies." Caroline's chest tightened, her breath coming in short bursts. "Emily, you don't have to believe him. You don't have to believe anything he says. I love you. I've always loved you, and I'll fight for you. Don't you understand? I'm fighting for you." But Emily shook her head slowly, the pain in her eyes almost too much for Caroline to bear. "You don't get it, Mom," she whispered. "You never understood. It's not just about him. It's about me. I've had to make my own choices, and I'm not the little girl you think I am anymore." Caroline stepped back, the words hitting her like a physical blow. She didn't know what to say. The guilt welled up inside her, so heavy, so suffocating. Had she really been controlling? Had she really never given Emily the space she needed? She wanted to apologize, wanted to fix everything, but the words wouldn't come. And then, from behind her, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. It was Derek. He had followed her. "You're wasting your time, Caroline." Derek's voice came from the doorway, his presence looming over them. "She's made her choice." Caroline turned, her face flushed with frustration and fear. "You've done this. You've twisted her mind. You've manipulated her into believing this." Derek chuckled darkly, stepping further into the room. "No, Caroline. I didn't do anything. She came to me. She made her decision. You're just too blind to see it." The words hit Caroline like a punch to the gut. She couldn't process them. She couldn't wrap her mind around the fact that Emily had actually chosen Derek over her. "Emily, please," Caroline said again, her voice breaking. "This isn't you. I know you're scared, but this isn't the way. Let me help you." But Emily didn't move. She just stood there, holding something tightly in her hands, her face unreadable. Caroline's eyes flicked down to what Emily was holding, a small silver locket, the same one Caroline had given her when she was a little girl. "Do you remember this?" Caroline asked, her voice trembling. Emily's fingers tightened around the locket, but she didn't answer. Caroline took a step forward, desperate to connect with her, to reach through the walls that had been built between them. "Please, Emily, I'm begging you. You don't have to go down this path. We can work through this together." But Emily's eyes, cold and distant, met Caroline's for the first time. "It's too late, Mom," she whispered. "It's too late for you to save me." The words pierced through Caroline's heart. It was the moment she had feared, the moment she realized, with painful clarity, that her daughter was lost to her. Derek had won. But before Caroline could respond, a shadow passed across the doorway. She turned, her heart leaping into her throat. The door was wide open now, and standing in the doorway was someone she hadn't expected to see. Someone she thought she had lost forever. Mux. Her heart stopped. Caroline's breath caught in her throat as she locked eyes with Max, his silhouette framed in the doorway. The world seemed to stop for a moment, as if everything had gone still. The very air in the room thickened, laden with anticipation. Her mind raced with 1,000 questions, none of which made sense. What is he doing here? She could hardly believe it. Max had been out of her life for so long. She thought he was gone for good, buried beneath the weight of their shared history. But here he was, standing at the threshold, his expression unreadable. The silence between them was deafening. Her heart slammed against her ribs, each beat filled with confusion, anger, and an aching sense of betrayal. How long had he known about this? How long had he been a part of this twisted mess? "Max," Caroline's voice cracked, the words slipping out of her mouth like a gasp. She didn't know what else to say. Her mind was spinning. Was this a rescue? Or had he come to push her even further into the darkness? Max didn't move at first. He just stood there, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the chaos. His gaze flickered briefly to Emily, still frozen by the window, clutching the locket in her hands like a lifeline. Then his eyes met Caroline's again, and the tension between them intensified. He stepped forward slowly, cautiously, as if testing the waters, unsure of what reaction he might provoke. "You shouldn't have come here," Derek's voice broke through the silence like a jagged knife. He stepped closer to Caroline, his gaze dark and dangerous. The air in the room seemed to vibrate with the weight of unspoken threats. Max didn't flinch. He didn't look at Derek. His focus remained entirely on Caroline, on the woman he thought he knew, but the woman who seemed more distant by the second. Caroline could see the pain behind his eyes, the hurt that matched her own. It was like everything between them had crumbled to dust, but here he was, standing in front of her, ready to face whatever storm was brewing. "You've been lying to her," Max said, his voice low and steady. But Caroline could hear the tremor beneath his words, the remnants of anger still lingering in his tone. "Both of you have. I couldn't stand by anymore." Caroline's mind reeled. Lying? What is he talking about? She opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, but the words stuck in her throat. What could she say? How could she explain this tangled web of deception, this twisted reality they were all trapped in? "You're wrong, Max," Caroline finally managed, her voice shaky but defiant. "You don't understand. You don't know what's really going on here?" Max's eyes softened, and for a moment, he seemed to drop the walls he had built between them. The anger faded, replaced by something darker, something that seemed almost like sorrow. "I'm not the one who's been blind, Caroline. I'm not the one who's been deceived. All these years, you thought you were protecting Emily, but you were smothering her. You pushed her away when she needed you the most." The words hit Caroline like a slap. Smothering her? She had tried so hard to protect Emily, to keep her safe. But in that moment, it felt like every effort, every sacrifice had been in vain. Max was right. Caroline hadn't seen the distance growing between them. She hadn't seen how much Emily had changed, how much she had suffered. She had been too caught up in her own fears to notice her daughter slipping away. "Don't listen to him, Emily." Derek's voice was sharp, cutting through the fragile moment. "He's just trying to confuse you. He's always been weak. He's not your father. He doesn't know what's best for you." But Emily didn't react. She remained where she stood, motionless, her eyes locked on the locket in her hands. Caroline's gaze flickered between Max and Emily, a pang of guilt slicing through her chest. How had everything gotten so complicated? "You don't get it, Derek," Max continued, his voice rising now, gaining strength. "You've been using her, manipulating her for your own gain. But she's not a pawn in your game. She's a person who deserves to make her own choices." Derek's jaw tightened, his lips curling into a sneer. "You don't have the right to lecture me, Max. You lost that right when you abandoned her. You lost everything." Max took another step forward, his eyes never leaving Derek's. "Maybe I did, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Caroline's mind whirled as she watched them. This wasn't what she had imagined. This wasn't the reunion she had hoped for. All these years, she had convinced herself that Max's departure was just a chapter that was closed, a painful memory she could move on from. But now, seeing him here, seeing the man he had become, she realized how much she had truly lost. "You don't understand, Caroline." Emily's voice broke the tension, soft but fierce. "I don't need to be rescued. I don't need anyone to fix me. I'm not a child anymore." Caroline's heart sank as she turned to look at her daughter. The words felt like a dagger to her heart. "She really does think I've been trying to fix her. She really believes I'm the one who's been wrong all this time." Caroline's chest tightened, the guilt threatening to swallow her whole. She had spent so many years trying to protect Emily, to shield her from everything she couldn't control. But now, standing in front of her, Emily was a stranger with a fierce, burning independence that Caroline couldn't reach, couldn't understand. Max stepped in front of Caroline, his eyes never leaving Emily. "I know you think you've made your choice, Emily, but you're not alone. You don't have to do this by yourself. You don't have to live in this world of lies." The words hung in the air, thick with emotion, but Emily didn't respond. She just stood there, her expression unreadable, her fingers still clutching the locket. Caroline felt the tears rise, but she fought them back. "Emily, please," she whispered. "Please talk to me. Tell me what you need. I don't want to lose you. Not like this." Max's eyes softened, and he reached out, placing a hand gently on Caroline's shoulder. "She's not lost, Caroline," he said, his voice low and tender. "She just needs you to see her for who she is, not who you want her to be." Caroline stood there, torn between the man who had once been her everything and the daughter she had fought so hard to protect. Her heart felt like it was being ripped in two, pulled between two worlds she could no longer reconcile. And in that moment, as the silence stretched on, the weight of everything, the lies, the pain, the unspoken truths, crashed down on her all at once. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she could fix what had been broken. But she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't give up. Not yet. As the dust of confrontation settled, the room fell into a quiet stillness, a silence that was both heavy and fragile. Caroline stood at the center, surrounded by the echoes of her past and the uncertain path ahead. Max's words lingered in the air, a reminder that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not on the outside, but within ourselves. Her gaze turned to Emily, who was no longer the child she had tried so hard to protect, but a young woman with her own story, her own journey. And for the first time, Caroline understood. She wasn't meant to shield her daughter from the world. She was meant to let her grow, to trust in her strength, and to stand beside her, not in front of her. Max's hand on her shoulder was a silent acknowledgement of the road they'd both walked, the mistakes they'd made, and the possibility of redemption, however uncertain. Maybe there were no easy answers, no perfect solutions. But in that moment, Caroline realized that healing didn't come from fixing things or controlling them. It came from letting go, from the courage to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. She looked around the room, at the people who had shaped her life in ways she never fully understood. And for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of their love, not as a burden, but as a shared bond. She could feel the tears gathering, but they weren't of sorrow. They were of release, of acceptance, of hope. She wasn't alone. As the camera slowly pulled away, Caroline's voice broke through the quiet. Maybe the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the chance to start again. To choose love over fear, trust over doubt. And sometimes we just need to let go of the things we can't change and embrace the ones we still can. And with that, the story didn't end. It transformed. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Caroline was ready to face it. Not with fear, but with courage. If you've ever felt like your past was holding you back, or if you've been at a crossroads in your own life, remember, the power to heal, to change, to choose is in your hands. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. What is the one thing you're ready to let go of, and what will you choose to embrace instead? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and move you. We're all in this together. The sun rose gently over a quiet neighborhood, casting soft golden rays that filtered through the thin curtains of a modest home. The faint hum of a waking city provided a calming soundtrack to the morning routine. In the kitchen, Caroline Parker moved with a quiet confidence, her blouse impeccably pressed and her short hair neatly styled. She exuded a sense of calm authority, though her warm smile revealed a deep affection for her family, especially for her daughter, Emily. Emily sat at the kitchen table, pushing her spoon aimlessly through a bowl of cereal. Her mind seemed far away, weighed down by the mixture of dread and apprehension about the day ahead. Caroline noticed her daughter's distracted behavior and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You need to eat, sweetie," Caroline said, her voice firm yet gentle. "You'll need your strength today. Big things are coming, and you need to be ready." Emily slowly lifted her gaze, her brown eyes filled with a quiet sadness. She didn't respond immediately, instead continuing to stir her cereal, watching it turn into a soggy mess. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "do you ever feel like no matter what you do, it just makes things harder for everyone else?" Caroline paused, taken aback by the weight of her daughter's words. She crouched down to Emily's level, her eyes softening as she met her gaze. "What do you mean, honey?" Emily sighed, her voice thick with the weight of her emotions. "It's just being the mayor's daughter. People don't like us because of what you're doing. They think you're taking things away from them, and they think I'm different." Caroline's heart tightened as she listened. She had always known that being the city's first African-American mayor would bring challenges, but hearing her daughter speak with such vulnerability hurt in a way she wasn't prepared for. "I know it's hard," Caroline said, her tone gentle but firm. "People resist change because it scares them, but it's the change that makes us stronger. You're helping people see that things can be different, and that's not easy. But it's worth it." Emily glanced at her mother, searching for comfort in the steady gaze of the woman who had always been her rock. Caroline placed a kiss on Emily's forehead, offering the silent reassurance she knew her daughter needed. "You're not the reason for any of this, sweetheart. You're part of the solution, and that's something to be proud of." The sound of a school bus rumbling down the street broke the moment. Emily's shoulders slumped under the weight of her backpack, and Caroline watched her daughter walk toward the bus stop with a mixture of pride and unease. She wished she could shield Emily from the harshness of the world, but deep down, she knew her daughter was stronger than she gave her credit for. When Emily reached the curb, the bus screeched to a halt in front of her. The door opened with a hiss, revealing the sour face of the driver, Derek Winters. His hair was graying at the temples, his beard unkempt, and his uniform looked like it hadn't been washed in days. He didn't acknowledge Emily as she stepped onto the bus, offering only a grunt that barely passed as a greeting. As Emily walked down the narrow aisle, the usual buzz of conversation from the other students seemed to fade slightly. A few of them glanced her way, but none of them spoke. It was as though they, too, were aware of the unspoken tension that followed her. She slid into an empty seat toward the middle of the bus, clutching her backpack tightly against her chest. Derek's eyes flicked toward her in the rearview mirror, a sneer curling at the corner of his lips. Though he said nothing, Emily could feel the contempt in his gaze. The bus jerked forward as Derek revved the engine, and Emily braced herself against the sudden movement. The bus rumbled down the road, but the atmosphere was tense, almost suffocating. At first, the ride was uneventful, with the bus rattling along the familiar streets. Emily tried to focus on the passing scenery, allowing herself to tune out the voices around her. But then, Derek's voice sliced through the noise, cutting into her thoughts. "Looks like royalty is gracing us with her presence again," Derek muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few of the students stifled giggles, while others looked away, not wanting to get involved. Emily felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but didn't respond. She had learned over the years that silence was often the best defense against people like Derek. Still, the sting of his words settled deeply in her chest. As the bus continued on its way, Derek's comments grew more pointed. "Must be nice having a mom who tells everyone else what to do," he mocked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe she should teach you how to keep your mouth shut and sit still." Emily gripped her backpack tighter, her knuckles turning white as she fought to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. She knew better than to let him see how much his words hurt, but it didn't make it any easier. When the bus finally pulled into the school parking lot, Emily was one of the first to get off. She quickly exited the bus, keeping her head down and avoiding eye contact with anyone. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her face still flushed with humiliation and anger. She didn't look back at Derek, but she could feel his eyes on her, a silent reminder of the cruelty she had just endured. The walk to her first class felt like an eternity, and she couldn't shake the feeling of powerlessness that lingered in her mind. At school, Emily did her best to shake off the morning's events. She went through her classes, staying quiet, keeping to herself, and avoiding drawing any attention. By the time the final bell rang, she was exhausted from holding everything in. The thought of getting back on the bus filled her with dread, but she tried to push it to the back of her mind. As the afternoon ride home began, the tension between her and Derek was palpable. He hadn't forgotten the comments he'd made earlier, and neither had Emily. The bus ride felt even worse than before, and Emily tried to block it all out, focusing on the passing scenery outside the window. When the bus pulled up to her stop, Emily bolted off the bus, her legs moving as fast as they could carry her. She didn't look back at Derek, didn't acknowledge the stares from her classmates. The moment she stepped off the bus, she felt a small sense of relief, but it was quickly replaced by the overwhelming weight of the day's events. At home, Caroline was waiting for her at the door, a warm smile on her face. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice light, though Emily could hear the concern underneath. Emily hesitated. The images of the morning, Derek's sneering face, the laughter of her classmates, flashed in her mind. But instead of voicing her frustration, she forced a smile and said, "It was fine." Caroline studied her daughter's face, knowing something was off but didn't press her. Instead, she opened her arms and pulled Emily into a warm embrace. For a moment, Emily allowed herself to relax in her mother's comforting presence, finding solace in her strength. But as the evening wore on, the weight of the day continued to cling to Emily, and she knew that tomorrow would bring even more challenges that would test her resilience in ways she couldn't yet understand. The following day, Caroline stood at her desk, staring down at a mountain of paperwork. The weight of the city's future, of her family's future, was pressing on her shoulders with a relentless force. She hadn't told Emily, but the pressure from the board was becoming unbearable. They wanted more progress, more action, more of her. But what they didn't understand was that progress didn't come without sacrifice. The city had been a battleground, with both allies and enemies playing for control, and Caroline knew it was only a matter of time before things came to a head. The change she was fighting for, the change that would break the chains of old ideologies, was never going to come easily. As the clock ticked closer to evening, Caroline's phone buzzed with a new message. The name on the screen made her heart skip a beat. Derek Winters. The bus driver had never reached out to her before, and she couldn't imagine what it might be about now. "Mayor Parker," the message began, "I thought you should know that your daughter has been causing trouble at school. It's only a matter of time before this catches up with you. Don't say I didn't warn you." Caroline's eyes narrowed, the words sinking deep in her gut like a blade. What was he talking about? Emily hadn't mentioned any problems at school. Still, Caroline couldn't afford to ignore the message. She immediately picked up the phone and dialed her daughter's school. Meanwhile, across town, Emily was once again facing the harsh reality of her school life. The bus ride had been even worse than the day before. Derek had made cruel remarks, not just to her, but to anyone who dared to speak to her. It was as though he found joy in degrading her, in reminding her of her place, of what he perceived to be her entitlement. Emily had learned to keep her head down, but the cruelty was beginning to break her resolve. She had no idea how long she could continue to endure this. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she saw her mom's name on the screen. Her heart twisted with conflicting emotions. Relief that her mom cared, but also dread because Emily knew deep down that there was nothing her mom could do. They were already outnumbered. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Emily." Caroline's voice was calm, but edged with concern. "I just received a message from Derek Winters. Is everything okay at school?" Emily's stomach dropped. She hadn't told her mom about the bullying, hadn't wanted to worry her, but now that the message had been sent, she knew the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. "I'm fine, Mom," Emily replied, forcing her voice to sound steadier than she felt. "It's just people are making things difficult, but I'm handling it." Caroline's voice softened, but there was an undercurrent of something more serious now. "I want you to know that you don't have to handle this alone. I'm going to talk to the principal. This has gone far enough." Emily's heart raced. She couldn't help it. She knew her mom meant well, but it would only make things worse. She had seen what happened when someone in power intervened. The people who wanted change would always fight back harder. It wasn't just Derek she was afraid of. It was the entire system. "Please, Mom," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't. Just let it be." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Caroline had never heard her daughter sound so vulnerable. Her heart ached as she listened to the quiet desperation in Emily's voice. But then something changed in her. She knew that Emily was strong, but even the strongest person could break under the weight of the world. Caroline couldn't let her daughter face this alone, not when she had the power to protect her. "I know you're trying to protect me, Emily," Caroline said, her voice firm, "but this isn't something you have to handle on your own. I'll take care of it." The line went silent for a moment, and Emily knew her mom had made up her mind. She could hear the determination in her voice, the same strength that had carried her through the toughest battles. Caroline Parker wasn't someone who backed down, no matter the cost. "I'll be home soon," Caroline added. "We'll talk about this more then. Just hang in there for a little longer, okay?" Emily nodded, though her mother couldn't see it. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. When the call ended, Emily sat in silence for a long time. She stared out of the window, watching the city pass by, but nothing seemed to hold her attention. It was like a dark cloud had settled over her, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake it off. At school, the hours dragged on. Each minute felt like an eternity as she endured the whispers, the stares, the mocking laughter that followed her wherever she went. She tried to focus on her work, to ignore the cruel words that echoed in her mind, but it was impossible. The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Emily quickly packed her things and rushed out of the classroom, hoping to escape before any more teasing could begin. She made her way to the bus stop, where Derek was already waiting, his eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for his next target. As Emily walked toward the bus, she felt his gaze fall on her. His smirk was enough to make her stomach churn. She knew what was coming next. Well, Derek said, his voice dripping with mockery. "The princess is back." Emily clenched her fists at her sides but kept her head down, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She boarded the bus, and the moment she did, she could feel the tension in the air. The other kids watched her like vultures, waiting for the first sign of weakness. But Emily refused to give them one. As the bus rumbled toward her stop, Emily felt her phone buzz in her pocket. She pulled it out, hoping for a message from her mom, some sign of reassurance. But instead, the screen lit up with a new notification. It was from Derek. "You should just quit. No one wants you here. Your mom can't save you forever." Emily's breath caught in her throat, and she felt a sickening jolt of anger surge through her. How dare he? How dare he think he could just threaten her like that? How dare he think she was weak? The bus came to a screeching halt at her stop, but Emily didn't get off immediately. She held her phone tightly in her hand, staring at the message as her heart pounded in her chest. And then, without thinking, she turned to Derek, her voice trembling but resolute. "You have no idea who I am," she said, her words cutting through the air with an edge of defiance. "You think you can break me? You think you can intimidate me? You're wrong." For the first time in a long while, Emily felt something ignite inside her, something more powerful than fear. She stood up straight, her shoulders squared, facing the man who had tried to break her spirit. Derek blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting her to respond. But there was a flicker in his eyes, something unexpected, something almost fearful. Before he could say another word, Emily turned on her heel and walked off the bus, her head held high. The next day, Caroline arrived at City Hall early, the weight of her responsibilities pressing against her chest like a vice. She had no time to rest, no time to breathe. The city was on the brink, and the decision she made today would ripple through the lives of everyone in it. Yet, even with all that was at stake, her mind kept drifting back to Emily, the way her daughter had spoken to her the night before, the fear she'd heard in her voice. Caroline had been able to protect the city, had been able to fight off political enemies and boardroom pressure, but could she protect her own child from the dangers that lurked within the very system she was trying to change? The door to her office creaked open, snapping Caroline from her thoughts. It was Derek Winters, the very same man who had sent the threatening message to Emily the night before. He stood there, his expression unreadable, his posture stiff. Caroline barely had time to react before he spoke. "Mayor Parker," he began, his tone low and measured, "we need to talk. It's about your daughter." Caroline felt a cold chill spread through her. Every nerve in her body was on alert, but she forced herself to remain calm, to keep her face neutral. "What about my daughter, Derek?" He stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the space before focusing on her. "I'm trying to help you understand that there's only so much I can do. The more you push back, the harder it's going to get, for both of you." Caroline's pulse quickened, but she held her ground. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice sharp, betraying the tension inside her. Derek took a step closer, and Caroline felt her breath catch in her throat. There was something different in his demeanor today, something darker, more threatening. "I know you're trying to fight for change, for progress, but you're not the only one playing this game, and sometimes the stakes are higher than you think." The words hung in the air like a warning. Caroline knew he wasn't just talking about her position as mayor. He was talking about something far more dangerous. "Stay away from my daughter, Derek," she warned, her voice firm, the protective mother within her rising. "If you think for 1 second you can threaten her, you've underestimated me." Derek's lips twisted into a humorless smile. "It's not just me, Caroline. You're playing with fire, and sooner or later, you'll get burned. There are others who won't be as forgiving." With that, he turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the hallway like a death knell. Caroline was left standing in her office, her mind racing. Who were these others Derek had mentioned? What had he meant by his cryptic warning? She didn't have time to ponder it for long. Her phone buzzed, and when she saw Emily's name on the screen, her heart lurched. She answered quickly. "Emily? What's going on?" But before Emily could respond, there was a sound, a loud bang that echoed through the line. The phone line went dead. "Emily? Emily!" Caroline shouted, her voice filled with panic. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a message appeared on the screen, one that sent a cold shiver down Caroline's spine. "It's too late." Her blood ran cold. She immediately grabbed her coat and rushed out of her office, the weight of the world on her shoulders. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. All that mattered now was finding Emily and making sure she was safe. Emily hadn't been home long when the atmosphere in the house shifted. It was late afternoon, and the sky was tinged with the dull, orange glow of the setting sun. She had just settled in with her homework when the phone rang. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the caller ID, her mother's name. With trembling hands, she answered, "Mom!" But it wasn't her mother's voice that greeted her. It was Derek's, cold and unyielding. "Did you think I wouldn't find you?" His voice was low, barely above a whisper, yet it carried a weight of menace that made her blood run cold. "You're running out of time, Emily. There's no way out." Before she could react, the line went dead. Emily stood frozen for a long moment, the phone still pressed to her ear. Her mind raced. Was this the consequence of defying Derek? Of speaking out? She hadn't thought things would escalate so quickly, but she felt the walls closing in. There was no escape, no one to turn to. Her mother was fighting battles of her own, and Emily had no right to drag her into this mess. Yet, deep down, something inside her burned with defiance. Derek Winters, the man who had tormented her for so long, couldn't break her. She wouldn't let him. But then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed once again. This time it was a notification from the school. It was a warning about an incident that had happened earlier in the day. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she opened the message, reading the words that made everything seem even worse. "Due to the recent threats and bullying, we have decided to initiate a lockdown procedure. Please remain inside the school premises until further notice." Emily's stomach churned. What was going on? Why had they suddenly decided to lock down the school? Her thoughts raced as she grabbed her jacket and rushed out the door. She didn't know where she was going, but she had to get out of the house. She had to find a way to stop the cycle that had been set into motion. Back at City Hall, Caroline had just finished meeting with her advisors when she received the phone call she had been dreading. The voice on the other end was calm, almost eerily so. "Caroline," the voice began, "we have your daughter. If you want to see her again, you need to give us what we want." Caroline's blood turned to ice. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady despite the panic that threatened to engulf her. The voice chuckled darkly. "You know exactly what we want. Your position. You give it to us, and your daughter will be returned. No one will ever know what happened. You got 24 hours. Caroline's world seemed to collapse around her. They had Emily. They had her most precious person, and they were threatening to take her away forever. For the first time in years, Caroline felt helpless. The one thing she had always been able to protect, her daughter, was now beyond her reach. The thought of losing her, of being forced to make a choice that could destroy everything, was more than Caroline could bear. She stood up, her mind a storm of emotions. She couldn't let this happen. Not now, not ever. The countdown had begun, and Caroline Parker wasn't about to lose the fight. Caroline's heart was pounding in her chest as she stood frozen in her office, the phone call still lingering in her mind. The words of the man on the other end echoed in her head. "Give us what we want, and your daughter will be returned. You got 24 hours. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her, leaving her to fall into a void of fear and uncertainty. But amid the panic, one thought burned brightly in her mind. She couldn't let them win. She wouldn't let them break her. The sound of hurried footsteps pulled her out of her thoughts. Derek. She turned quickly, her fists clenched at her sides. He was standing in the doorway, watching her with that same calculating, emotionless expression. "Derek," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions roiling inside her. "What is this? What is happening?" Derek didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost too calm, as if he were savoring the moment. "You think you can stand against the system, Caroline? You think you could take on people like me and win? You're out of your depth." Her fists tightened further, her nails digging into her palms. "You think this is just about the system, Derek? You think this is just about politics? My daughter is in danger. And you're the one behind it. You've gone too far." He didn't flinch. "I'm not behind it, Caroline. I'm part of it. And so are you. You've been playing a game, thinking you could change the rules. But the rules were never in your hands to begin with. You're out of time, and so is your precious daughter." Caroline's breath caught. "What did you do to her? What do you want?" Derek paused, a flicker of something almost like amusement passing over his face. "I haven't done anything. Yet. But that's not up to me anymore. The clock is ticking. You either make the right decision, or you lose everything." He turned and walked away without another word, leaving Caroline standing there, feeling as though the ground had been ripped out from beneath her all over again. She couldn't think. She couldn't breathe. Emily was out there, and she was the one who had put her in danger. Underscore, 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 underscore. Emily sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling as she stared at her phone. Her mother's frantic voice still echoed in her mind. I'll get to you, Emily. Stay safe. Don't trust anyone. But in the back of her mind, Emily wondered if her mother could really get to her in time. Would she? Could she? The sound of the doorbell ringing brought Emily out of her thoughts. She stood up, heart racing. She didn't want to answer it. She couldn't trust anyone right now, not even the people who were supposed to protect her. Her eyes flicked to the window, and her breath caught. A black car was parked outside her house, the engine running, waiting. The window rolled down slowly, and she could see Derek's shadow inside. Her heart skipped a beat. He was here. What did he want? What was happening? Before she could make a decision, the doorbell rang again, louder this time, almost insistent. She hesitated, then grabbed her phone and sent a quick message to her mother. They're here. Derek. Emily's stomach churned as she walked toward the door. She didn't know who was more dangerous, Derek or the fear gnawing at her insides. Underscore, 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 underscore. Back at City Hall, Caroline slammed her hand down on the desk, unable to contain her fury any longer. They wanted her position. They wanted to take her down, destroy everything she had fought for. They wanted to use her daughter as a pawn, to break her spirit and force her into submission. But Caroline wasn't like other people. She wasn't going to give up without a fight. Her phone buzzed on the desk, and she grabbed it instantly. Emily's message flashed on the screen, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. She was so close to losing her. They're here. Derek. Caroline's heart raced as she read the message, but she didn't have time to waste. She had no choice. She had to move fast. She had to save Emily. Without a moment's hesitation, Caroline grabbed her coat and rushed out of her office, her mind already working 1,000 miles a minute. She needed allies. She needed resources. She needed a plan. Underscore, 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 underscore. Emily opened the door slowly, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She had no idea what Derek wanted, but she wasn't about to give in to him. You're not going anywhere, Emily. Derek's voice came from the doorway, cold and unforgiving. I'm not going anywhere with you, Emily said, her voice trembling but resolute. Leave me alone. Derek's lips curled into a cruel smile. You don't get to make that decision, not anymore. Before Emily could react, he stepped forward, blocking her way. He reached out, grabbing her wrist with a force that made her gasp. You can't run from this, Emily. You're already in too deep. Emily twisted her wrist in an attempt to break free, but Derek's grip only tightened. Let go of me, she shouted, panic rising in her chest. She had to get out. She had to warn her mother. But with each passing second, she felt more and more trapped. Then, just as quickly as he had grabbed her, Derek let go. He stepped back, his eyes cold and calculating. It's too late, he whispered. You've made your choice. Emily's breath came in short, desperate gasps as she backed away from him, her mind racing. What did he mean by that? What was he threatening? And what choice had she made? Before she could ask, a knock came at the door. A sharp, insistent knock. Emily froze. She knew who it was. She wasn't alone. And the nightmare was only just beginning. Underscore, 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 underscore. Caroline raced through the streets of the city, her mind focused on one thing, Emily. She had to find her. She had to protect her. But the closer she got, the more she realized that everything was spiraling out of control. Her daughter's life was no longer the only thing at stake. Her own future, her career, everything she had worked for was in the hands of people who would stop at nothing to break her. As Caroline neared Emily's house, her phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. She opened it, her heart sinking as she read the words. "You've lost. Emily is ours now." A cold wave of dread washed over her. Was it too late? Had Derek won? Was she too late to save her daughter? The feeling of helplessness she had been battling all day finally consumed her. And in that moment, Caroline realized the depth of her despair. She had been playing this game, thinking she was in control. But now, she was the one who was being played, and the clock was ticking. Caroline's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. The message from the unknown number still hung in the air, its words echoing in her mind. "You've lost. Emily is ours now." Every passing second felt like an eternity, the urgency pressing on her chest like a heavy weight. She had always been in control, always been the one who made the decisions, but now everything was slipping away. She pulled up in front of Emily's house, the engine of her car idling with a nervous hum. The place looked eerily quiet, the front door standing wide open as though someone had been expecting her. Or maybe someone had planned for her to come. Her heart raced as she stepped out of the car, each step towards the house feeling like it brought her closer to a breaking point. She had been so sure of herself, so confident that she could handle whatever Derek threw her way. But now, as the door loomed before her, she had to admit she was afraid. Afraid of what she might find, afraid of what she might have lost already. Inside, the house was still, silent. The only sound was the soft creak of the floorboards beneath her feet as she stepped cautiously forward, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow. It didn't feel right. It felt wrong. She had no idea what had happened to Emily, no idea if she was even here. But something told her that this was only the beginning of a much darker game. She reached the living room and froze. Her gaze landed on something that made her blood run cold. A single object on the coffee table. Emily's phone. The screen was cracked, the message app still open, as if someone had been reading it. A chill swept over Caroline, a wave of dread that left her breathless. What had happened here? Why was Emily's phone left behind like this? Was it a sign? A trap? Without thinking, Caroline grabbed the phone, her fingers shaking as she swiped through the messages. Her own message was there, the last one she'd sent Emily. "They're here." Derek. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she scrolled further. A new message appeared. "It's too late. She's ours." The room suddenly felt smaller. The walls felt like they were closing in on her. She had underestimated Derek. She had underestimated how far he was willing to go to make her suffer. But it wasn't just about her. It was about Emily, her daughter, the one person she would fight for no matter what. And now, her daughter was in danger because of her choices. Caroline's breath hitched as she heard a sound from behind her. She whipped around, her eyes searching the shadows. But there was nothing, just the oppressive silence of the house. Her pulse raced. Was someone here? Was Derek waiting for her? And then she heard it, a door creaking open from the back of the house. A figure stepped out from the shadows. It was Derek. Caroline's heart pounded as she faced him, her body tense with a mix of fear and anger. She had prepared herself for this moment, for this confrontation, but seeing him here, standing in her daughter's house, made it all too real. "You shouldn't have come, Caroline," Derek said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. He took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "This is over. You lost." Caroline didn't move. She couldn't. Her mind was racing, but she forced herself to stand her ground. "Where is she?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "Where's Emily?" Derek's lips curled into a smirk, but there was something colder in his gaze now. "I told you. She's ours. She's part of the plan now." A sinking feeling filled Caroline's stomach, as though the ground beneath her was crumbling away. "What plan?" she asked, though she already feared she knew the answer. Derek stepped closer, his tone suddenly turning more dangerous. "The plan to destroy you. You think you can stand in our way? You think you can change the system? You're nothing more than a pawn, Caroline. A puppet in a game you don't even understand." And now, you've lost the only thing that ever mattered to you. Caroline's breath caught in her throat. You're using her? You're using my daughter to get to me. Derek's smirk widened. That's right. She's always been the leverage. Always will be. The room seemed to spin around Caroline as she processed his words. She had been so focused on the politics, on the deal-making, that she had never truly understood the depths of Derek's ambition. He wasn't just trying to take her down. He was trying to erase her entirely. He was trying to break her from the inside out. And now, with Emily in his hands, he had all the power. But Caroline wasn't about to give up. Not yet. Not ever. I won't let you have her, Caroline said, her voice low but filled with determination. She took a step forward, not backing down an inch. Derek raised an eyebrow, his expression unfazed. You think you can stop me? You think you can take her back? You're too late. The system is already in motion. There's no going back. Caroline's eyes narrowed. You're wrong, she said, her voice hardening. I will fight. I will fight for her. And I will tear down everything you've built, Derek. Do you hear me? Derek's smirk faltered for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. But it was gone as quickly as it came. We'll see about that, he said coldly. He turned and walked toward the door, pausing only to look back at Caroline. But remember, Caroline, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You made this choice. You brought this on yourself. And with that, he was gone. Caroline stood there, her heart racing in her chest, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Emily was still out there, still in danger. And Derek had just made it clear that he wasn't going to stop until he had everything he wanted. But neither was Caroline. She would fight. She had to. For Emily, for herself, for everything she had worked for. And she would make sure that Derek paid for what he had done. The tension was palpable as Caroline stood in the doorway of Emily's room, her fingers still trembling from the confrontation. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know how much time they had left. But she knew one thing for sure. This was far from over. And whatever it took, she would make sure it ended with Derek losing. Caroline stood still in the doorway, her breath shallow as the weight of Derek's words crushed down on her. You brought this on yourself. She wanted to scream, to run after him, but her legs wouldn't move. Her mind raced, memories flashing, of the sacrifices she'd made, of how far she'd come, only to see everything she built unraveling before her eyes. She glanced down at the phone in her hand, the cracked screen mocking her. There was no way she was going to lose, not like this, not after everything. But what could she do? She was up against a man who understood the system better than anyone, a man who'd use her own daughter as a pawn in his game. It was then that something in the house shifted. A noise, a faint creak of the floorboards, distant but unmistakable. Her heart leaped into her throat. Someone was still here. Emily. With renewed urgency, Caroline rushed down the hall, her footsteps quick but cautious. Every part of her screamed to find her daughter, to make sure she was safe, but a dark thought lingered. What if Emily wasn't the only one in danger? What if Caroline herself had already lost more than she realized? As she reached the end of the hallway, the door to Emily's room was ajar. The house, so quiet before, now seemed alive with tension. Caroline pushed the door open, her hand trembling as she stepped inside. But the room was empty. Her chest tightened. She glanced around, searching for any sign that Emily had been here. The bed was undisturbed, the desk neat. But the window, Caroline's gaze darted to the window.